To start off with, I want to tell you what happened or why we were picked to do this. My wife and I were sitting at having lunch one day. There's a knock on the door. I said, "Come in," and Bob Venables walked into my house. He introduced himself and told me he was a history teacher at Oswego. And I said, "Well, sit down. That's it. Let's talk about history." And so this was the first meeting of 36 years of meetings. We've been sitting together for 36 years, talking about what has happened in the state of New York with the state officials and the Haudenosaunee leaders. And he says, so I says, "Well, tell me about your history." So he started telling me about the history, and I said, "No, that's wrong." He said, "What do you mean that's wrong?" I said, "It's not the right history. Let me tell you what the history is like." So I tell him what the history was like, and he says, "Never heard of that." And I says, "Well, that's our history, Bob. And this is how we think, this is what we say, and this is the way history is according to us." So from that meeting, he went back to Oswego, took in these books, checked out, done some research, and found out that what I was saying in my oral history was recorded in the archives of the state of New York's literature research historians had written. And I said, "Wow, we got to talk some more." I like this idea because right now I'm my father and I sat for years talking about history, treaties and so forth. Then I sat in the council, as Dick said, I was there for 35 years. I've been sitting there. And when the elders are telling me about treaty obligations and so forth, I said, "Well, let me look these up." So I went to the library, and in a cabinet that was locked, I found the treaties. They wouldn't let me take them out. They just let me look at them. So I talked to a friend of mine, and I says, "Look, there's treaties out there somewhere. I need copies of them." So my friend went to various libraries, and finally I started getting a collection of papers. And then I read the treaties, and I said, "Wow, these treaties are nowhere near what my elders are telling me." So I went to the longhouse at Onondaga, and I says, "These treaty obligations that you've been telling me all of these years are not written down that way in the treaties. They're not." I said, "No, did you ever read these?" "Nope." I said, "Well, let me read these to you." And so I read the treaties, and he says, "Wow, that ain't right." I said, "Well, yeah, that's true." I said, "So we have to do something about this." And they said, "Right. What do we do?" I said, "Well, we're going to have to educate the people about the true history of the Haudenosaunee state of New York." So again, this started my voyage to the various colleges and universities. And his voyage from Oswego to my place. And so for 36 years, we've been sitting here discussing the history of the state of New York from my point of view and his point of view. And funny too, because he would say, "Well, this is the way the history is, Irv." And I said, "No, that's incorrect. This is the way it is." And he says, "No, that's not right." So we'd argue back and forth. And then he would go back and he would check his books. He'd come back. He says, "Irv," he says, "you're right." Which made me feel pretty good. And then we got into the real nitty-gritty of history. And he started changing his history from what was written to The oral history of the Onondagas in the Haudenosaunee. And this was to the delight of Oswego. They were so delighted that they fired him. And then he went down to New York. He worked with the Smithsonian Institute down there and continued on with its education and the history of the Haudenosaunee according to Herb Powers. This, of course, was delighted by them also, so they fired him from there, John. I know this is a very serious matter, but there are a lot of funny incidents that have happened, and so we'll be telling those as we go through, and we have a picture of him and I, or I have a picture of him and I. That I asked for, and he sent to me a couple of weeks ago. At Cornell, they set up a resident hall for Native students, and he wanted to integrate Natives and students that were going to Cornell. So they had a big project going. They built this resident hall. They gave it a Mohawk name, Akwigo or something like that. They did it in a theme of treaty belts, purple and white. And they invited me down there to help with the opening of this residence hall. And Cornell, in all their wisdom, decided I could give 300 years of history to those that were there in 3 minutes. So I had 3 minutes to prepare this, and we have, in front of this, where we were, was a big oak tree. And for the event, Bob had dressed up as Thomas Jefferson. So he had his coat, tails, his white shirt, knickers and white socks, buckled shoes. And of course, I was there in my full regalia, feathers, beadwork, moccasins, and so forth. And we stood underneath the spreading oak tree and had our picture taken. And I said to Bob later, I said, well, it looks like Onondaga was talking to Thomas Jefferson under the spreading oak tree. It's a terrific picture, but though it was only taken a few years ago, it's a reflection of back 300-400 years ago when our leaders were meeting with the founding fathers of the Constitution of the United States. In 1966, as a spokesman for the Onondaga Nation against the state of New York Taxation Department, I was out speaking on behalf of the nation and our status as non-taxable people. I know that we have, in our territory anyway, we've always had freedom of speech. And this became part of your Bill of Rights and your Constitution of the United States, where you have freedom of speech. And so I felt very confident, that I could go out there and I could speak on behalf of the Onondaga Nation, because it's my privilege and my right to be able to do this. So that's what I was doing. So freedom of speech is okay, I guess, as long as you're seeing the same thing that's going on in Washington, D.C. I tell you that so that you're aware that there's consequences to being a speaker for your community or whoever. If it's against the policy of the United States, they just may come after you. Last week I was talking to Bob about the things that have gone on in Onondaga and surrounding territories. People come to us for help. And the people in Newfoundland had a problem with their fishing, and Newfoundland was coming after the natives and telling them they couldn't fish. those people, the Micmacs, came down to Onondaga and told us that what was going on, and could we help? We said, sure, we can help. So we sent people up there to see what was going on. While we were there, contact point was made. Orrin Lyons was one of those that we sent up there. So he said, well, you can contact me. And they said, terrific. So they came back, and wasn't too sure how we're going to do all this stuff, but Orrin went down and seen Bob. He said, Bob, I got some messages coming through from the Micmacs. I wonder if you could take them and then forward it on to me, he says, because I think that our phones are tapped. So Bob said, sure, I can do that. So a couple days later, the phone rings. Bob answers the phone. Hello, this is Micmacs up at Newfoundland. We got a message for the Onondagas. So Bob said, all right, give me the message. So he took the message, and then he had a number to call. I think it was Orrin's number. Dial the number, and it gets all kinds of noises on the phone. And finally some guy says, hello, this is Station 6. And Bob says, well, you better keep quiet about Station 6 if you want to hear what the message is. So Bob gave him the message, and he said, I didn't understand what the message was or what it meant. He said, I hope Orrin got it. I said, I haven't seen Orrin since Bob told me this to see whether he ever got the message, but our phones were tapped. And one of the things that I have said to those that come to us, not only Native people, but Europeans come to us for help. And I tell them, I said, well, pay attention to what goes on in Indian Territory. Right now, they got their guns pointed at us. If we're going to get a big outcry from the mass media that this is not right, they're going to turn their guns on. They're going to be facing you. They're going to be coming at you next. And they say, yeah. Then they're back 10 years later, and they say, geez, we should listen to you. Because what happened to you has now happened to us. I'll give you an example of that. In 1971, New York State decided, the Transportation Department decided they're going to put another lane up on 81. And we said, no, you can't do that. They said, well, we have a contract with you. I said, well, show us the contract. They showed the contract. The contract says 2 lanes going south, 2 lanes going north. Doesn't say nothing about a 3rd lane going up there. I said, well, we give you $10,000 to do that. We'll give you $10,000 more to put the other lane in. I said, no, our land is not for sale. You can't do that. Anyway, we spent the whole summer up on Route 81 arguing with the Transportation Department about this 3rd lane they wanted to put in. The Sheriff's Department went down to Utica, and they got a judge down there to make a ruling. And the judge ruled that the Onondagas could not go up on Route 81 and protect their own property, their territory. They restricted us from going up on 81. And so we met, and the Onondaga Council says, well, we're going to have to fix this. Irv, go to New York and talk to the lawyers. I said, all right. So I went down to New York, and I talked to Omar Gabashi, an Egyptian. And I told him what had happened, and the courts had ruled without us ever being in court. He said, well, that's not right. Who is this guy? I said, I don't know, some judge up in Utica. So Omar found out who he was, called him up and said, you made a decision against the Onondagas without the Onondagas being in court. They had to have their day in court. Open it up. So the judge okayed it, and Omar went up there and explained, stopped in at Onondaga. We told him what we wanted him to say. He went up to Utica and talked to the judge. The judge reversed his decision of what he had done before, and this time he ruled that New York State Department of Transportation did not have the power of eminent domain in the territory of the Onondagas, and they were to cease their work and to remove themselves from the territory. And I said, wow, what a decision that is. That's a terrific decision. New York state laws do not come into our territory, especially eminent domain. And it says, so these people from the city of Syracuse should have been up there on 81 with us, but they weren't. Now guess what? The year is 2006. I understand that there's an eminent domain project in the city of Syracuse. Well, we told you. Anyway, for this first half a page here, I'm going to turn this over to Bob Venables and let him go down, because this guy, I've listened to him talk, as I said, for the last 36 years. He just too amazes. It amazed me on the figures and the information that he has, and he tells about history. And I want you to know that what you're going to hear tonight is something that you haven't heard before, probably haven't read about. You only read about it if you're doing research, or you know what books to find, or he gives you a list of books. Says, look at these things. We got people like Bob Venables and Larry Hutman, who have written about what has happened to the Haudenosaunee and the relationship with the state of New York. Larry's last book is Conspiracy of
Interests.
Conspiracy of Interest, and he explains how the state of New York intimidated and coerced the various nations of the Haudenosaunee to make treaties and give up their land. So-called treaties, because the Constitution of the United States says they can't do that. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Bob and let him come down through various historical points, whereas the state of New York and the Haudenosaunee or the Onondagas met and discussed various issues.
Thank you, Irv.